This is The Weekly Set, an official podcast of TheTotalScreen.com.
I wish I was the monster you think I am.
You have come here to beseech me?
Can't ask for your soul.
Madness can be a medicine for the modern world.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Weekly Set, the official podcast of The Total Screen. I'm your host. My name is Tyson, and joining me today, as always, is my partner in crime here at The Total Screen, William Rohrig.
Hello.
So, we are recording this episode on August 24th, 2020, and this is episode 269 of our podcast. And today, we are going to take a look at what happens when you mix Jim Crow racism with Eldritch horror. Of course, what I'm talking about is the new trailer for Cobra Kai Season 3 that Netflix just put up. No. We're talking, of course, about Lovecraft Country on HBO. This is the new show produced by J.J. Abrams and Jordan Peele, and it's being run by Misha Green, who had previously done Underground, which was a show about the Underground Railroad. So yeah, based on a novel by Matt Ruff from 2016. And the premise of the novel, why the novel kind of went in this direction, is that around that time there's a lot of discussion going on about H.P. Lovecraft, who is an undeniable provider for the horror genre, and for this specific genre of horror is basically his creation almost entirely. Like there's some other authors that contributed, but it's pretty much almost entirely Lovecraft. So he has provided so much to the genre. He was also a pretty fucking horrible racist.
Yeah, he was a piece of shit.
Yeah, he was a pretty bad person, and a lot of the kind of horror themes that are so good in his works are based on basically his own, like, xenophobia of like, black people and other cultures in general. And so it's like, how do we embrace his contributions to the genre while not, like, glorifying the man? And this is kind of like a question that's been going around with writers in genre fiction for like a while now. Like, how do we deal with the Lovecraft problem? And it's something that rears its head every so often. George R. Martin just recently got in trouble for making some remarks about Lovecraft. There's some stuff that's always going on about this because it's a tricky situation to deal with. It's into that whole, how do you separate the art from the artist kind of situation.
Here's the thing. I watched this. I don't even think this embraces the art. I think this uses the concept of Lovecraft and his creations kind of like to serve the theme, because Lovecraft was a racist and a lot of those creations were born out of his racist beliefs. I think it's using that to illuminate the theme of embedded racism, in the United States,
Yes.
Like it's just another, the monsters are, funny enough, just another aspect of the racism that exists around them, even if they're not as threatening as the actual racists, and I think that, I could be wrong, but I think that's the intention behind it.
Yes, that was the intention behind the novel, was like, there was the problem of how do you separate the art from the artist, or how do you deal with a figure like Lovecraft that's so influential while also addressing, the issues, the problematic nature of him as a person, and even in what he created. And this is kind of Matt Ruff, who wrote the novel. This is his kind of answer to that, is Lovecraft Country. Is like, we can embrace kind of the monsters from there, but we can use these themes as xenophobia, and we can kind of turn it on its heel and turn it back into kind of like what was going on at that time and where these racist beliefs came from. And it has things that if you look at, that make perfect sense for a tale about racism. Like creepy small towns with, people wielding enormous power. It's like this fits right into a narrative about racism in America.
Yeah. And especially watching episode 2, it kind of reminded me of like this sort of like stuff like The Wicker Man, you know, where you go to like this small town and it's all these creepy white people. And you know, in the Wicker Man, it's not like it's racism, like it's a cult, but it's like the same thing, only this time they're very racist. All right.
Yeah.
Like and it's using horror tropes that we recognize to illuminate that theme of institutional racism, you know, and just like, you know, like the protagonist being surrounded by it no matter where they go. It doesn't matter if they're away from Arden or, you know, like they're away from like the creepy village or the monsters, even, you know, like they're still going to be surrounded by institutional racism no matter where they go.
Yeah.
Like, so I think it's an interesting use of like these traditional horror tropes that we're so used to.
Oh yeah, the racism in this show is like horrifying. You know, like there's no punches pulled.
Well, I want to point out, like, the most tense part of the first episode had
nothing to do with monsters. Well, unless you're speaking metaphorically when you say monsters.
Yeah, unless you're speaking. No, I was gonna say the most tense part did not have anything to do with the Shaggas. I think they're called, like those
Shaggoth, I think, or
Shaggoths, like those creatures. No, it had nothing. It was right before that when they were in the county and the sheriff pulls up to them and tells them that it's a sundown county and basically like toying with them, telling them, oh, you know, you have like 7 minutes to get out of the county or, you know, we're going to do some really bad shit.
Yeah, we're going to hang you. We're going to lynch you, you know, if you don't.
And they have to like drive slowly out of the county because they can't and the sheriff is like following them the entire time, right? And they can't speed because like he'll stop them and lynch them, you know, because that gives them cause. So they got slowly, with very little time before sundown, drive out of the county, and he's following them like the whole way. And that is the most tense scene in the entire first episode.
And it's a real thing. Sundown Towns was a real thing in Jim Crow America.
Yeah, people might be surprised to learn this, but that actually was a thing. There was actually places in the United States where they did not want black people, you know, around after nightfall, you know, because basically they didn't want them around at all. But like the idea was like, if they're there after nightfall, then they arrest them and they lynch them. You know, it's horrifying.
Yeah, it was a super tense scene, and just the racism in general. That scene's like a prime example, but I mean, just in general, is horror. Like there's horror music that, like the OST or the soundtrack for this, you know, the score it's a horror score, but it's not just used when there's like monsters around. Like the hints of that, the notes come up at all times. Like they come up when they're just dealing with the white people being racist, and it plays it into that perspective of like, this is horrifying. Like any wrong choice of words and they could die.
Yes.
And they know it, and it's tense, and it's just really put in your face. Like the hate that comes off of the white characters in this is like a seething hate. Like not even like the sheriff and the people in the secret society and stuff in episode 2. Just talking in general, like they walk past some white woman to go into a cafe, and the looks they get are like just seething with hatred.
Oh yeah.
You know? And it just puts it into that perspective.
It's very much like constantly like people staring at them with just a look, but it's a look that says, you know, you're not welcome here.
Yeah, it's like an ever-present danger, and that's part of what makes it work so well, ironically, I guess, with like Lovecraftian lore, is that feeling of ever-present dread, that like something could go horribly wrong and be just incredibly bad at any moment. And that's kind of like where this show sits. I mean, when the monsters show up in the first episode, it's almost a relief at that moment.
Right, yeah, because the monsters actually end up saving them from the police, weirdly enough.
I mean, they're attacking them too, but it doesn't matter. Like, they would have for sure been dead if those monsters hadn't shown up.
So it's an interesting contrast. to me, this is some of the best horror I've seen in ages. I'm going to say that flat out right now. I don't know if that's your opinion, but that's my opinion.
I mean, I haven't watched a lot of horror films recently. There's been a few ones that have been really popular, like The Witch and what's that one? Like Midsummer, you know? Ones like that have been like really well responded to and stuff. I haven't watched them, so that hasn't really been my thing. My experience is more with horror on TV, and, you know, like there's been some great horror on TV, but I mean, I'd say this is, right up there with like Hannibal as far as like great horror on TV, you know? And Hannibal was kind of a different kind of horror. Like, I don't know if I really felt a lot of dread when I watched Hannibal, you know?
Yeah.
It was a different kind of horror. But, so I mean, I would agree with you, with the caveat being that I haven't watched a lot of recent horror. So I don't have a lot to judge it by. But, in general, it's a very tense show that still manages to have moments of levity and moments of fun and moments of adventure and just things that are fascinating.
Oh, yeah. You talk about
that relieve some of that stress and tension.
Yeah. Like there are moments of levity. There's this great scene at the beginning of episode 2 where it's showing them they're in like that mansion, that castle, I guess. And they're basically like going through all stuff. They're basically given free reign of the place. And it's playing, the Jeffersons theme song.
Yeah, you know? Moving on up.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like almost like the characters are like dancing to it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a great scene of like levity before like we descend into the total darkness that is the rest of that episode. Cause you don't get that high note again. It all goes to shit from there. So it's like, you do get those moments of levity, but they're short-lived.
I like the explanation in it, because at first it's a little jarring that it starts on such a positive note. And yes, they have all these things and stuff, but they also just came from a horrifying situation. So what the hell? Why are they that happy? Like, there should be something else tainting it. But then as it's cutting back and forth between George and Letty, who are the characters that are exuberant in this moment, then it cuts to Atticus, our protagonist, and he is not feeling it. He is not happy. He is not dancing around to the Jeffersons theme song, you know? And eventually what you find out is that George and Letty just don't even remember seeing like horror at all. Like they've had a spell cast on them so that they wouldn't remember these things. And it's something that like it comes into effect again because they encounter monsters again, and the second the monsters are gone, they've already forgotten what happened.
Right.
And so this explains how they're able to be kind of exuberant, how you can have like a moment of fun and levity in that kind of mindset, you know? Like, how do you have that fun and levity in that mindset? Well, it's because they don't remember that mindset.
Right.
They don't remember their position, and that allowed them to have that moment, you know?
I gotta say though, overall, I did prefer episode 1 to episode 2.
Oh, I did too. Yeah, definitely.
Oh, yeah. I just thought the highs were higher, you know, in the first episode. The second episode was extremely lore heavy,
mm-hmm.
which is fine, because I guess we gotta get the show's gotta go somewhere. And it did end on this like fantastic sequence where like they're performing like the spell, and it destroys the entire place. It turns like everybody into like ashes except for Atticus and Letty, you know, and the others.
Letty and George and Montrose, who they finally catch up with, Atticus's father.
Yeah.
They'd all gotten out of the building before, except Atticus, and Atticus got out just as it basically, the entire mansion collapsed behind him.
And it sucks because, like, George actually ends up dying at the end of episode 2, and he was one of my favorite characters. Like, he was the guy who had, like, the knowledge from reading all the books to, like, kind of guide the others through, like, the situations that they were in. You know,
in Buffy terms, he was the Giles, you know?
Yeah, in Buffy terms, he was the Giles, yeah. Like he was the one who, like, kind of figured out that the Shaggoths were, like, similar to vampires, and so they could be hurt by light, and they could also infect others. Like, he figured that out. He just figured that out from, like, reading Dracula. And also he was just like such a great kid. Like he was like the level-headed one too.
Yeah.
He was like the one who was like, when everybody else is like freaking out, he would be like, stop and think this out,
It's also his family dynamic was really interesting.
Yeah.
Like he had like, he's older, so he had an older relationship with his wife, but like a very loving and romantic relationship between them. And then his daughter was like a really cool character who like draws him a comic book as he goes on every adventure that he takes off on to work on his book, which you should basically say like what he does for a living is that he makes, if you've ever seen the movie Green Book or heard about Green Books, basically the idea is that, it's dangerous in that time to travel across America if you were black. And so people would make like guidebooks for like, places that you could stay that were safe, like hotels you could stay in that were safe, towns that were safe, places that you should not go through, things like that. Like so they'd make like it's like a travel book basically, but more aimed on the idea of survival than on the idea of like, oh, you could get a good meal here or something, and so that's his business, is that he does these books. And so he has to go on these trips every so often. And him and Atticus go on this trip because Atticus is looking for his father. And he's like, well, I'll just work on my book and go with you. And his daughter makes him like a comic book every time he goes on an adventure. It's like that's a really sweet dynamic, and it's just going to make it like so much more tragic when we see that family again,
Right, exactly. And I'm actually wondering now, like at the end of episode 2, like where the story is going, because it seems like the principal antagonists are gone. But I don't know, like the one woman there, like we didn't see her turn to ash.
The woman and her like servant, the guy that's like always with her, both of them, neither of them we saw killed. And it seems to me, based on the way things played out, she kind of caused the incident that caused everybody to die.
Right.
Like it's not like she escaped it. Like it seems like she caused it. She put the ring on Atticus's finger and made like a cryptic comment about how a small change could like change everything or something.
Yeah, that's right.
And that was right after they had a whole conversation about the fact that she wasn't allowed in her father's group because she wasn't a man.
Right.
And kind of dealing with the idea of like sexism. It was an interesting conversation because it was sexism versus racism, where she was saying you can be part of this just because you were born a man. And he responds, and a black man, no less.
Yeah.
And showing like he doesn't even want to be involved in this bullshit. And he's being forced to. His whole life's being hijacked from him. And she wants nothing more to be part of this, but she can't because of the sexism inherent as well. So yeah, like she basically seemingly caused this disaster that befell what seemed to be our antagonist, but are probably just the setup for bigger antagonists down the road.
I don't know what's coming down the road, to be honest.
My guess is that it's going to be one of those story types where they return home thinking that they took a heavy loss, but they survive, and the horrors that they discovered are going to follow them.
That's what I think so too. Yeah.
So it's like they've once you've come across horror, it's with you kind of thing, It's going to be a part of your life from now on. You can't just like return back to normal. And so I think that's where it's going to end up going. And it's going to bring in these other characters that we've met that we moved on from quickly in the first episode. It's going to bring them into that fold now. So I mean, you have, like we've mentioned, Atticus's aunt, his Uncle George's wife is going to be one character. His uncle's daughter is going to be a character. We had Letty's like half sister who's like she sang with. Like you have an introduction like that. It would be kind of weird if she never showed up again,
And that's another thing I want to touch on is like the pacing. I feel like the pacing is good. It's not like moving too slow or too. It seems like it moves at a pretty fast clip. Like when they set off from Chicago to Artem, you like I initially thought, okay, that's going to be like a few episodes with them on the road.
They arrived at Artem at the end of the first episode.
Yeah, at the end of the first episode. Like, exactly.
And they left by the end of the second.
Yeah, the whole thing's destroyed by the end of the second. So this is moving at a pretty quick clip. So that means like, that to me tells me there's a lot of story to get through in these episodes. So that means, to me, like that kind of signals that there's a lot of shit that's going to go down, like throughout the rest of the series. So that So they're moving through it because there's a lot to go through, and that's exciting.
Yeah, this family of sorts has now kind of found themselves like in the crosshairs of the supernatural. And that's kind of what I think this is what's moving forward now. This is how the story moves forward. That they're going back thinking they can return to normalcy, but you can't. Once you've been exposed to this, you're part of it, you know? And so that's where I think it's going. But yeah, it's interesting how quickly everything resolved in this, you know, like how it just, normally you'd think like, oh, first season would probably have ended with what ended up happening at the end of the second episode. And you'd imagine like, okay, so maybe the first 2/3 of the season is going to be them trying to find the place, getting to the place, discovering it, finding this creepy society. And then the last third is going to be an escalation of what the society is. And then leading up to what ended up happening at the end of season 2, or at the end of the second episode. Like that would be normally what you'd consider the first season path. Like, okay, season 1, that's the path, but we've covered it in 2 episodes.
That's what I initially thought, but yeah, we've covered that in 2 episodes. So what's next? You know, that's the thing I'm like on pins and needles now. I mean, and I love shows that are action packed, that are frenetically paced. I think the pacing right now is perfect because I think like a lot of stuff happens per episode. And they always keep it exciting. There's a lot of crazy shit in episode 2. Like episode 2 really like you got these people like they can do literal magic, you know? There's this insane sequence where they got like everybody like hypnotized into like seeing these apparitions, you know? Like,
our 3 leads are in separate rooms. And they're all having like separate visions. And they introduced it in a weird way because they introduced it with Letty. They showed hers first, and hers involved Tick showing up at her room. And at first, like I'm thinking like, wait, I thought he was like magically sealed in his room.
Yeah, because
how did he get out? You know?
The scene right before they show him being sealed in his room through magic, you know, and all of a sudden he's in Letty's room, and that's kind of like, wait,
it's a little
what?
jarring.
Yeah, it's a little jarring. So you're not quite sure what happens, you know. And then he's like talking to Letty, and they're having a moment, you know, and then they go into kiss, and then it cuts to Atticus in his room, and he's fighting like a Korean like soldier, and it's kind of like, and you're thinking, wait, wasn't Atticus just like with Letty, but he was also trapped in his room? Yeah. So it's a little confusing, like at first how they do that, how they introduce that.
And then you see George, and he's set upon by a woman from his past that turns out to be Atticus's mother. And that's like a woman from his past. And this is like an interesting dynamic that they bring up that we weren't anticipating. That, and they made a hint at it later also. George might be Atticus's actual father. It might not be Montrose. It might be George.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's what they hint at.
Yeah. And so we see this woman who was the woman that passed on this blood right to Atticus, basically. This, his blood connection to this cult, or this secret society, the Order of the Ancient Dawn, Sons of Adam chapter. that group, his connection to them, and his powerful connection to them, I should add, is because of his mother's side of the family. At first I thought like, oh, so it's about him having some, like they keep talking reclaim your birthright, but his father had disappeared and stuff. And I'm like, okay, so this is like his father's family. Like, you know, like it's his father and his uncle, like that side of the family, but it turns out it's not. It's his mother's side of the family that's connected to it. And this is like an interesting discovery that George later reveals, because he basically, like, they set up these 3 characters' rooms to have like everything that they want in them, basically, probably through some sort of magic. But Letty has like this insane wardrobe, and George has like all of these first edition books.
Right, yeah.
And among the first edition books is a copy of basically the history and rules and bylaws of this organization that they're trapped in. And so there's a moment where George and Atticus are at like a dinner party thing for the Sons of Adam, and they're about to eat their host's liver that he had removed from himself and prepared for everybody there, when George stands up and basically reveals, in a really tense moment, because I was like, the way he was talking back to like this room full of powerful white people and the looks they were giving him, I'm like, oh shit, George is gonna die. Like, they're gonna straight up murder him for saying this, you know?
Yeah.
For talking back to them. It was really scary. Like, just like I'd mentioned before, like the vehement hatred just pouring off of the white characters in the show, you know? It was strong. Like, it was rolling off. You could feel it, you know? And so the more he's saying, the more I'm like, oh God, he's gonna die. He's gonna die. Like, you know, and then he basically goes through this whole thing about how anybody who's directly related to the founder of this chapter of the Sons of Adam is like, has to be obeyed, like, period. And he reveals that the whole reason why they want Atticus so much is that he is the only remaining direct descendant. And therefore, he holds the power and he can order everybody. And so Atticus stands up and orders everybody to leave. And they do. Like, they're reluctant. And then he says that that's an order and they all get up and leave. Except the one person they didn't tell to leave, the head of that family, Samuel Braithwaite, and he basically reveals that he only listens to the doctrine so much as it supports what he needs.
Right,
like,
exactly.
He basically says, like, don't confuse your being useful with you being indispensable.
Exactly.
So yeah, it was a really creepy scene. But I also wanted to bring up, we had mentioned that them being in their separate rooms having these delusions that were being put on them. This was like done also partially for the entertainment of the Sons of Adam, who are like literally watching through like magic doorways and laughing and enjoying their pain and suffering.
It's done for entertainment, which is, you know, that shows you like the depths of the depravity of these people.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was done for no other purpose than that.
I'm trying to figure out kind of what to talk about now, like because there's a lot to talk about that we haven't talked about. I'm just trying to figure out where I want to go with it. I guess maybe we could bring up the way they use speeches in this show as like a form of like background music. So like normally on a show you'd have like a montage and there'd be like some music playing or something. And this show, it does that too, but at certain times instead of playing background music, it'll play like a famous like speech or something, or a spoken word poem or something like that.
Yeah,
it's like very different.
Like at the end of episode 2, when Atticus, you know, they're performing the spell with Atticus, and it plays over the whole thing. It plays over the spoken word poem Whitey on the Moon, which is also like the episode's name.
Yeah, that's where the whole poem's basically about, you know, it keeps in the poem it keeps restating like, you know, we have no roof, no heat, no food, but Whitey's on the moon, you know?
Right.
Saying like how they put all this money and all this effort into getting into space putting a man on the moon, and yet black people are dying in poverty on the streets.
Right, exactly. Yeah, like a very, very heavy, you know, very critical spoken word poem. You know,
and this is all done as basically as they're trying to like drain the life energy out of Atticus.
Yes, to open like this portal. Apparently, like they're trying to open a portal into the Garden of Eden so they can achieve immortality. And that's
how creepy is that that's the guy's goal, is basically that the leader of this group, the Sons of Adam, his goal is basically he wants to get back to Eden because in his mind what's great about Eden is that everything knows its place or like serves its place.
Oh yeah.
So like the white man is on top and everything else is beneath it, and that's what's great about Eden to him.
Yeah, that's
why he desperately wants to go there, because he can't stomach being even though he's already on the top of the food chain anyways. Like he can't stomach the idea that that's even a question.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
exactly.
That's just how much that offends his sensibilities.
He needs it to be absolute.
Yes, and he goes into a whole thing where he talks about like a Bible verse, and he's saying like the meaning behind this verse is that, you know, Adam named the creatures, and in doing so he took part in creation and put everything in its proper place and stuff. And it's like, this is done, basically he's saying this to Atticus and his daughter, who's the blonde woman we saw get out of the silver Bentley in the first episode. He's telling this to the two of them, and her reaction is kind of like, you know, biblical literalism is like for the weak, you know? And Atticus's reaction is basically just like, what the fuck is this white guy saying? Like, yeah, put me in my place. Yeah, okay. I know where this is going. I'm not for this.
Yeah, he's like, I'm not for this. He's like, just give me my father and I'll be out of here.
Yeah.
Of course, that's not what happens.
Yeah, there's another example of like a good speech though, back on the topic of that, is like in the first episode, Sundown, when they start their travels, when you first start seeing like the signs that are reminding black people that sundown towns, that they're not allowed to be there after sunset, and you get that creepy vibe and stuff, as they have this like montage of them driving, it's set to a speech that James Baldwin made during his debate with William F. Buckley Jr. in 1965. So this is a speech that happened like 10 years after the, time, because this show takes place, I think, in like 54. So this is like 10 years later that the speech was made, but they're using it in place of background music. And it's this speech James Baldwin made, basically talking about like the kind of the role of black people in America.
Right.
And it's not only do you have the speech going, but you have it, juxtaposed with like footage of them as they're traveling, and they go to a gas station and there's people mimicking monkeys and laughing at them.
Oh yeah.
And doing like horrible things. And then they'll get in their car and pull away, and you'll see like billboards for like Aunt Jemima. And like they're really pushing in home like what it means to like be black in this America, and like see like everything around you being a form of oppression. So it's like the way people treat you, the way you can only, you can't go to the same service counter to get your food. You have to go to a different one. The way that, there's like products basically mocking your heritage,
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
So it's just interesting the way they use speeches though in place of music for some of these things. And they do it a number of times, They even did it. The opening sequence of the first episode is just wild. Like at first I was kind of like a little thrown. I'm like, this might be a little bit too pulpy for, for what I thought the show was going to be. But it becomes very quickly apparent that it's, that this is a dream sequence.
Like, yeah. The opening dream sequence is like, yeah, I was like, that was something else. I think, I don't know, like I get what they were going for, but man, does it clash with like the rest of the series so far? Because it's just way out there.
It's just playing on who Atticus is as a person. The fact that this is his dream. It's like the amalgamation of like all the things that he is into, it's his hero is Jackie Robinson, the baseball player, like the pulp elements, it shows like old time war footage because he went to war in Korea, and then it's got these elements of Lovecraftian horror with like Cthulhu flying over, and it's got UFOs and a Martian girl that represents like the Princess from Mars book.
The book he's reading.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Like it's a really creative way to introduce his character. Definitely sets an impression at the beginning. Although like if you go into those first minutes thinking like, okay, this is just gonna be batshit insane like that, and then expect like the rest of the series to be like that, you're gonna be disappointed. But
I was like, this might be too pulpy when I was watching it, and then when I realized it was a dream sequence, I'm like, oh, okay, this is okay, this is fine. It's not going that pulpy. That's good. But yeah, I mean, even when that dream sequence ends, he's on a bus with another black woman, and they're segregated. The bus breaks down. They go to pick up the passengers, but not him and this woman. They have to walk.
It's interesting too because they make a point at that scene to like where like all the white people getting off the bus, they're like helping each other out. They're offering to help each other out, and it shows the lone black woman, Atticus and this woman were the only two black people on the bus. It shows her, she's struggling to get her luggage. Nobody's offering her help except for Atticus, and so that's another powerful scene right at the beginning of the show.
Yeah. It also does an interesting thing where he's telling her about the book that he's reading, which is Princess of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs. He also wrote like Tarzan and stuff, but that's the first book, I believe, in the John Carter series, which is, they've tried to adapt that to a movie like once. It was kind of a box office flop, but it's a very pulpy book, about this guy, this Confederate soldier, general, that gets transported to Mars and gets caught up in this whole like fantasy world. But basically, basically, when he's telling this black woman about it as they're walking, she's like, hold up, are you saying that the hero of this book is a Confederate soldier? And he's like, ex-Confederate. And she's like, well, he fought for slavery. You can't put an X in front of that.
No, you can, yeah, right,
Yeah.
exactly.
And then he says like, no, you can't, but it's still a book he's reading. And I think that that's like, it goes with what we were talking about at the very beginning of the podcast about the whole idea of like, how do you make a story about the works of H.P. Lovecraft without, acknowledging that he's a horrible person. And that's what this is. That's what this is exactly doing, is he's saying he's reading this book, even though he knows like, oh, the main character of this is a Confederate soldier. This main character is somebody I cannot relate to on this level. But I'm enjoying this book, this piece of art that it fits into what I enjoy. And so it's that whole argument of separating the art from the artist, And it's illustrated right at the beginning, because you have that dream sequence, then the bus, and then this conversation is like our first real introduction. Like the dream sequence introduced us to his interest, but that introduced us to like kind of the conflict within the character.
Right.
Which is also the conflict within the entire property, which is how do you balance, the work of the author against the actual author itself, the author himself in this case.
Right.
So yeah, so lots of good stuff.
Lots of good stuff. Like I said, I'm loving this. Like the tension, the horror is on point. It's got great characters. Yeah, no, I'm excited to watch the next episode. I can't recommend this enough. If you're not
Monsters,
watching
Magic, Racism.
Monsters, Magic, Racism. It's a wonderful brew. If you're not already watching this, I recommend that you do. Just fantastic stuff.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
It's good and it's moving forward at a good pace. So it's got some interesting areas where it can be taken. So it'll be fun to kind of see where it goes next and what they end up doing next. As I said, my guess is that they're bringing the horror back with them.
Yeah. And I have a sneaking suspicion that you're correct.
Yeah.
So I won't disagree with you there.
So I made a bunch of show notes that we didn't even end up touching on, but I don't really think we have to force ourselves to.
No, I mean, like I said, like if you want to go ahead. Like I was kind of like, if you want to bring something up and we'll talk about it, like that's fine.
What's one thing I didn't even put in the show notes, but I want to bring it up, and it's on a technical level, but it's one of the first things I noticed about this show that I really like is it's something called color keying. And so basically, when you make a movie or a TV show or anything, you do one of two things. You either do color correction or color keying. Color correction is basically just making the colors look accurate. Color keying is when you take the colors and you push them to inaccuracy, but for like an aesthetic style. And this show has amazing color keying. The colors in the show really pop, especially at nighttime when you have like the headlights revealing colors that you wouldn't see at night. Greenery doesn't look green at night. Everything takes on like a blue tone, And so if it was color corrected, like all the grass fields at Driving House would have like a blue look to it. But here they're green, even though it's at night. That's all because of color keying. So I just wanted to kind of bring that up as something to kind of pay attention to as you watch the show, is the colors and how they're not accurate, but how that's done for like an aesthetic purpose and how that look contributes to the show.
Right,
Yeah.
for sure.
So everybody watching that, pay attention to that because it's actually really cool and really well done. But yeah, unless you have something else you want to talk about, I guess we can end it there.
Yeah, that sounds good. We'll be back to talk about episode 3 next week.
Yeah, see, it's going to get a little confusing because we're going to be talking about 2 shows soon. And because of the way certain episodes are being released, I'll just say next week we're going to be covering just 1 episode of Lovecraft Country, episode 3. But the week after that, we're going to be covering the first 3 episodes of The Boys, season 2. And then we're not going to be discussing Lovecraft Country that week because we have 3 episodes to discuss. So the week after that, we're going to discuss the 2 episodes of Lovecraft Country missed and then the 1 episode of The Boys. So we're kind of fitting it in that way. That's how we're kind of fitting it in, just so you know. So, and then after that point, from that point on, it's going to be both of those shows, at the same time. But yeah, it's in order to get up to speed on The Boys because it's releasing with 3 episodes. we're going to take a break in 2 weeks from talking about Lovecraft Country just to be able to deal with that. Because otherwise that podcast episode will be like 2 hours long.
Yeah.
And we don't want that.
That would be insane. No, we don't want a 2-hour podcast.
So we're going to kind of spread it out by dividing it up that way. But yeah, so next week we're going to be talking about episode 3 of Lovecraft Country. Week after that, we're talking about the first 3 episodes of The Boys. And then it's going to be both shows from that point on. And we're not skipping episodes, so don't worry about that either. But yeah, so that's it. That's what we're talking about next week. All we have left to do is talk about what's coming up in the week ahead. So on Monday, August 24th, that's today as we're recording this, Reno 911 has come to Quibi. On Tuesday, August 25th, The Haves and Have-Nots came to Own and Trinkets to Netflix. On Wednesday, August 26th, In the Cut to Bounce and Doo Soul Soul La La Soul to Netflix, as well as La Venganza de Analia to Netflix. On Thursday, August 27th, Pure comes to HBO Max and Agretsuko Season 3, I believe, comes to Netflix. On Friday, August 28th, Masaba comes to Netflix. On Monday, August 31st, This Joka with Will Smith comes to Quibi and Wireless also comes to Quibi. On Tuesday, September 1st, Transplant comes to NBC. On Thursday, September 3rd, AP Bio comes to Peacock. This was an NBC show that was canceled and then revived for NBC's streaming service Peacock. I'm actually really excited about this. I really enjoyed that show. It's got one of the guys from It's Always Sunny in it. It's a really good comedy. But also on that day, Raised by Wolves comes to HBO Max. That's the new TV series from Ridley Scott. Looks really high production value, really like high concept about like robots raising humans after like an apocalypse and all this. It looks crazy.
Oh wow.
I recommend checking out a trailer for that. It just looks pretty nutty. Also, Young Wallander comes to Netflix, which is a new British series. On Friday, September 4th, The Boys comes to Amazon Prime. And like I said, we are going to be discussing that.
For sure.
And Away comes to Netflix. And then lastly, on September 6th, that's a Sunday, Power Book 2 Ghost comes to Starz as a spin-off of the series Power. And Undercover comes to Netflix. So that's what's coming up in the next couple of weeks. That takes us into early September. Till then, you can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Tyson Gifford. Will is at Voxel Hero. You can check out our Facebook page and our YouTube channel, as well as our site, thetotalscreen.com. You can subscribe to the podcast through any major podcast client like iTunes or Pocket Cast. And the entire backlog of our podcast is available on our YouTube channel. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Good night.
Bye.
If you would like to reach out to us and make a comment, send an email to contact@thetotalscreen.com. Stay tuned to The Total Screen for the very best in genre television.